Hey guys, welcome to another video. Today we're going to be talking about where do you even start with computer programming. It's honestly a question that I personally get asked quite a bit, and it's a hard one to say as to, where you start. And I think that the first thing is to know that the path of a programmer isn't all kind of happy days. It's long nights, it's hard work, and it takes decades to become fluent. There are some people who obviously pick it up much quicker, um, but for the most of us, you'll be spending a lot of time learning and developing yourself. So before you even start, you have to ask yourself, are you the sort of person who can commit yourself? It's probably one of the hardest careers to hold down for a span of many decades. But I don't want to sound too negative. First of all, you need to choose a programming language. That could be PHP, it could be. I'll write down some notes. Programming. PHP, C++, Python, C, Java, JavaScript. I'm not being funny, but there are so many languages out there that the first thing you start to think is like, what is going on here? To be fair, I missed off a few. They're endless. Then you've got the frameworks, and it all starts to get a little bit edgy. And even I'm probably confusing you by saying that. Now, think of the languages like the very first thing you have to learn before you can actually write a language. But at the same time, there's a lot of similarities. If I can remember back to my university days, you had kind of your high-level languages and your low-level languages, and I feel like there was maybe one more in there somewhere, but I'm not going to talk about that. Because what I want to talk about is what's easiest to get into. Because I feel like when it comes to learning programming, you don't want to learn something mental straight away. You don't want to throw yourself into something that's complex and has weird syntax and is almost like the Matrix, which is why it's amply over here. In terms of looking at it, you want something that's very readable. You want something that makes sense. A lot of people would suggest Python as the first thing because it teaches you the logic, and that is really where programming lies. It's not so much in the languages and the syntax; it's the logic and the flow, and how you write code. It's basically like reams of you saying, if this, then that, or maybe this, and can you do this? And for that, Python makes it very, very interesting as kind of a intro language. Now, I know that Python is something that you can use for really high-end stuff, but I'm just going to be ignoring that for a second, because if it was me, I personally never actually started on Python. I feel like I started on C#. And also with like websites and stuff, and from there it spiraled out of control. But for me personally, dare I say it, PHP, the most widely used language, whether it's for web applications or, well, it is a web language, but it can be used for enterprise level stuff, it can be used for websites. It's not necessarily something that kind of holds you back, and the community for it is huge. And from there, kind of where I would start personally, if I wanted to see if coding was for me, I'd try Python. I'd jump into making some basic things. I know that there's stuff like making basic math problems, and I would stick with it for a couple of years. Whether or not you need to go to school or university, I personally didn't learn anything from either of them, is a different thing. But from the point of kind of choosing a language, if it is PHP, just start writing code. The whole thing about learning is you have to do to learn. So until you start to kind of give yourself problems and try and solve them, then I don't really know what to suggest. One thing that I did in the early days of when I started to learn to code was Project Euler. Now, Project Euler is, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, it's a list of problems. Let's see if we can find you some. That are both mathematical but also bear a lot of resemblance to teaching good programming methods, because you have to solve them all in under so many seconds. And I remember just literally crunching through a lot of the problems. I was head in the maths books and just coding away, really. So, to not ramble on too much, once you've chosen a programming language and you feel like you're getting somewhere, when I talk about kind of giving yourself problems, tear apart stuff and break it and fix it and break it and fix it, and it's only really there that you will start to learn. A good programmer isn't, I don't think, defined by their ability to create perfect solutions, because creating a perfect solution from the ground up is actually much easier than fixing stuff that's broken. A good programmer has the ability to solve stuff quickly and digest information very, very rapidly. So, in the case of learning, I would obviously suggest pick a language. So being logical is really, really important when it comes to coding, and I think that by writing code and writing solutions, you find that you start to see things a little differently each time, and I think the best way to kind of get better at programming is to work on a couple pet projects and go back to them every now and then and see if you can write it better, or if there's something else that you can change. I mean, I'm constantly rewriting my own code, whether it's something that I made a day ago or a year ago, because I found better solutions or better way of doing the same problem, or solving the same problem rather, but just in a much more efficient or different way. And that mentality doesn't necessarily come overnight, and I think that's why a lot of new programmers struggle. They feel overwhelmed that they can't solve the problem, and sometimes you've just got to keep at it, even if it's you can't fix it for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 20 weeks. Once you solve it, you know how to fix that problem should it happen again. Also, learning Stack Overflow. I'm just trying to think of a PHP error. Trying to think of an interesting one I had the other day. Here we go. The next thing that I think a lot of people don't do is they don't Google enough, and there's nothing wrong with Googling a problem to find the answer for it. You can't expect that every problem you have to be able to fix it. That would be stupid, because at the end of the day, there's so much information out there, and there's chances are 100,000 people have probably already had that same problem. And places like Stack Overflow are really, 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 really good. And you know, you can read through sometimes like your problem and find some comments and really just digest all of the answers, and it's through that continuous kind of cycle of breaking stuff that you get better and better and better. Now, kind of some closing thoughts on the topic. I'm just trying to think. Are books good? These are some questions that I had sent to me. Not really. I think that there's so much on the internet that you don't necessarily need to. What language you should learn first? PHP. What is the first step to learning programming? Obviously, this whole video is about that. But I guess, to be honest, if you're like, you know, not looking to jump straight into something like PHP, maybe you could try some static HTML websites. Are there any good tutorial sites? Codecademy is pretty good. How can you motivate yourself? Oh, I'm still looking for that answer myself. I think that programming is often one of those things that it's just so daunting because it's so gritty, and you really need to just sit there, find the time, but equally take the time to reflect on the solutions, and it will come sure enough. And also, if you're interested in learning PHP, because I'm a PHP fanboy, pretty much the only things you need to get started if you're on Windows is something like XAMPP, which is a local host. Although if you're paying for it, then I'd really recommend MAMP, because MAMP has a really cool thing where you can quite easily remap domains to run on the local host. So it does like a htaccess rewrite for you, whereas XAMPP doesn't do that. But if you were just getting into it, you can mess around with some basic PHP on there. And then I would start to do silly things like install WordPress, tear it down, you know, learn what MySQL is, and really start to kind of understand how all the pieces of the puzzle go together. And then from there, if you're wanting to learn even more about how PHP applications work, there's this fantastic thing called open source. Why am I on this bit? There's this fantastic thing called open source software, and if you go on GitHub and look at like anything like WordPress or Node or I don't know, you know, most integrations and blah de blah de blah de blah, you'll find the entire contents of the solution itself, and also the history of all of the classes, and you can kind of go into them and see what problems have been fixed and how they've been fixed and why they did things a particular way. And I think that that is equally a good way to learn. Jumping into the open source community, whether you actually make a mistake or don't make a mistake, or you know, your solution is good and it's accepted, and I think I'm rambling a bit there. My point being, contributing to the open source community, if you feel that you're good enough, is a good way to get feedback on your work and your solution. And that's the other thing. Most coders are really narrow-minded when it comes to accepting other people's advice when it comes to solving problems. So don't be afraid to take on board critique if there's a better way of doing something. But yeah, I think that that's really all I can say on the topic. Obviously, I'm a PHP fanboy, but I started my roots on stuff like C#, so it is what it is. And thank you for watching the video.